Hello, friends,
Welcome to the Liberation Chronicles. I'm Robin Parker.
and I'm Jorge Zeballos. This is another episode of the Liberation Chronicles, a series in which we hope to give voice to the liberation in our current historical context, and discuss what it means to build a truly inclusive society. Today, we have two special guests, friends that we have known for quite a few years. So we're really happy to have you both, Jamie Washington and Sam Offer from the Washington Consulting Group. Our discussion will focus on the personal experiences of Latino and Black men with insights from Jamie and Sam. And please don't forget to give us your comments about the episode, like the episode, subscribe, and also maybe offer some suggestions for other speakers that we might want to bring on the podcast. Who would you like to hear from? We have some ideas of things that we want to talk about and some folks that we want to invite, but we're looking forward to hearing from you and seeing what other names, what other people we may not be thinking about. So please share your ideas with us. Robin?
Yes, thanks, Jorge. I'm happy to give our audience just a little bit of background on Jamie and Sam. Dr. Jamie Washington serves as the president and founder of the Washington Consulting Group, which was named by The Economist magazine as one of the top 10 global diversity consultants in the world. Jamie has served as an educator, administrator, and consultant for 40 years plus. He served as an invited instructor in the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Lancaster Theological Seminary. Jamie also serves as the pastor of Unity Fellowship Church of Baltimore and is an elder in the Unity Fellowship Church movement. Also, Reverend Sam Offer, who serves as a senior vice president and senior consultant with the Washington Consulting Group. Sam began his professional career in K through 12 schools, serving as an English teacher for 15 years and a high school principal for 10 years. His extensive studies also cover human sexuality, faith, and religious and spiritual pluralism with a focus on issues within the LGBTQ community. Sam is an alumnus of the Landmark Education and the Social Justice Training Institute and a certified National Inclusive Excellence Trainer. Welcome to you both.
You. Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you, my friends. Our discussion today is meant to be conversational. And I think because of the way we interact whenever we're together, I don't think that's going to be hard. So the conversation, as we said earlier, is going to be around sharing experiences around the intersecting identities we men of color carry. So we want to start with a question that hopefully will give our readers, some of the, or our readers, our viewers, our listeners, some of them might know both of you because we run into similar circles, obviously, but there might be some folks out there that maybe have never met you before, have never heard from you before. So we want to give them a little bit of context, some background about who you are and what you have experienced. So we want to start with this question. What do you think is important for the audience to know about your life experience around race, ethnicity, and gender?
Yeah.
And whoever wants to start, you go ahead.
Well, I'll start. And again, thank you so much for this invitation to be a part of this podcast. And I look forward to the fun we will have today, and all of the great things that will happen. As I think about this question, and I've been sitting with it for a day or so, and I think one of the things that come up for me is that I want folks to know that the voice they hear today is not the voice that they would have heard 25, 30 years ago, right? I grew up in a very conservative family, very religious family, and, you know, talking about race and about gender identity and about sexuality were not things that just were conversations that we had growing up. And so what folks might hear today would be very different than what if someone had approached me 20 years ago, right? Because I would have not given had these things to be significant in the same way that I hold them now in my life. As a Black person, you know, I tell folks I've been Black all my life, and that is the truth, right? And the other part of that is I did not have a clear understanding of what it meant to be a Black person, what it meant to be a Black man, what it meant to be a queer Black man, right? And how all of those things are intersectional and how they show up every day. And so I'm grateful for the challenges and the work that had to be done to get to where I am today. And I hope that as folks are in this conversation with us, listening, that it also gives them hope to know that wherever they are, we can meet them there and we can grow from that place, right? Whether it's today at 55 or tomorrow at 45, we can still do the work and get to that liberated space. That's what I would want folks to know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate so much the your sharing and the question from Robin Jorge that invites us into context, right? And that we recognize that the Black male, the brown male, all of our experiences are not a monolith, right? And they are informed by the context in which we enter the planet. And those things are informed by the year, the dates. It's informed by the communities, the locations, the geographical locations, the particular families that we enter in through, all of the things, the birth order dynamics, all of those things inform our experience. There are some collective experiences, and we'll get into more of that moving forward. But as I think about my own, there are some similarities that I have to Sam, but I am a child of the 60s. And I grew up in that space in North Philadelphia, right? I was in an urban area that was all Black. It was a Black area. There were other areas. We didn't spend a whole bunch of time in them. We didn't go to them, but we didn't necessarily want to, right? You know, the Black community was perfect. You know, we had the church, we went to school. We had that. That was it. That's all. That's what we had. And so I am, as we think about it's the intersection of gender, I am the only male child that was born in my generation. That informed a lot of what I navigated and experienced and what was expected of me. Growing up with both my mom and my dad, and a dad who was a construction worker and a sanitation worker, right? And in the 60s, what I got to see in media around what opportunities there were for Black men to be successful, and to not get in trouble, you know, right? Because we saw all of the images of us as, again, laborers. We saw this as policing, but we also saw us as pastors and as ministers and as football players, as athletes. Right? So those were the things that we were beginning to see as options. Music was just was there, it was beginning, but those were exceptional spaces. So you're going to be a musician, you're going to be an athlete. Those were not what the average was. So what the normal Black man was gonna be was either going to be a laborer, if you would, or in ministry. That was the stuff that I saw kind of growing up in my time. The other piece for me, though, was being a child in North Philadelphia. The other place I spent a lot of time was in the South at my grandparents'. And that's where I interacted across race.
Mm.
Because my grandparents lived in the segregated South, but there was segregation was whites are here, blacks are here, and there were very strict rules, if you would, often unwritten, in that space, in the mid 60s, early 70s, around who could go where and who shouldn't. I mean, it was right after whites only and blacks only spaces and so on. So,
Mm.
however, similar to Sam, we didn't talk about it. We just lived it, right?
Mm.
Unless there was an incident, right? So I thought that when I thought about race and particularly racism, I thought that was the South. So when I would go
Mm.
down to my grandparents' place, I was like, that's where the racism is. We don't have no racism up north. So we going down here to get y'all together. We gonna come together. We was the city once and we was gonna get them together. So that's the young, that's the young Jamie. That's Jamie from 8 to, from birth to 12 or 13, 14 years old. And didn't really experience even having a conversation about race really until college.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even really a conversation about it until college. So, yeah, so that's where I'll end it. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Wow. You know, I also came into like real awareness that there was some stuff that would show up at times and made me think about some things related to race. But as you all know, I grew up in Peru, and certainly at the time that I was growing up, there's a little bit more open conversation today, but we definitely did not talk about race. I mean, nobody talked about race. Nobody talked about race, which meant that if I noticed anything, there was nothing to help me make sense of it in any significant way. And it wasn't until even later, Sam, than you. I'm in my mid 30s. And by that point, I'm actually working with Robin and Pamela, and they're training me to be a facilitator. And it is in that process that for the first time in my life, I had to seriously think about what is my racial identity and what does it mean to me? Right. So I came into it like late. And then I had to go back and revisit my experiences growing up in Peru to try to piece this thing together. And Robin knows, my process sort of, trying to trying to manage this sort of monster of a narrative, as I try to piece it all together to begin to have a clearer sense of who am I racially, right? So, and I think even now, unfortunately, in my community, that conversation is still not an easy one to have. There are some folks that have been able to find over time to be able to have some real, honest, transparent conversations, but in a general way, my community is not there still. We still want to ignore race having anything to do with us. And so, it's still a difficult conversation to have, but that's, I didn't expect to hear that from both of you, that it kind of, the serious investigation started later because I thought I was kind of unique in that sense. Right. And partly because I grew up in Peru, but that's interesting.
And I think the piece for me that's popping here, Jorge, as you talked about, family and others, is that's not a conversation that happens even with my family now, right?
Mm, mm,
It is a conversation that I have,
mm-hmm,
because being an educator and being around folks who initiate those conversations and see the value of it, I have 8 siblings.
mm, mm.
And we don't talk about race, right?
Wow.
We don't have those conversations. They don't come to the table. And if I bring it up, then they shut it down quickly because nobody really wants to have that real conversation and the impact of race in our lives, right? And so I just feel like the joining you there, right, on how across our identities, our racial identities, that the same things are happening, right? So much is happening in the same way. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it stretches a while, right? So I think about my nephews. And so by the time my oldest nephew, by the time he was in college, I was steeped in this work, right? So I was, he's 16 years younger, so he was an athlete, right? And there's we could do a whole show on what happens with our athletes, right? Particularly our Black and brown men, and so on and so forth, and how these institutions use them and so on, right? So and but because of, and he was at predominantly white institutions, and because of that, he was special, right? So athletes got treated in a certain way. They got to eat at different times. They were the kind of kings and so of the campus and all those things. So he didn't have, and then he grew up in my house, in the house with my mom, right? So again, in inner city North Philadelphia, not a whole lot of discussion. So again, I do want to enter class here, right? So how, depending upon where you grew up and your class and social, most of us were just living it. My family are definitely impacted by race without question, right? And I could walk them through the ways that happened. But I'll never forget, he had gone through and he had gotten his MBA, and he was navigating some stuff, working in a bank and all these things. And he had this moment, and he was 39 years old by this time. And he said something had happened, and he said, "Uncle, or maybe 35, do you think that was about race?" And I was like, duh. like, what are you asking me? Right? I mean, surely by now you have noticed. I mean, it was just classic. It was textbook stuff around who got hired and who got hurt and who he ended up having to train and just all the stuff, right? He's the only manager of color, the only Black person of color, manager, and all the things that were happening to him. And so I realized that it's not lost on me that it doesn't matter. It's not just from the 60s that we didn't talk about. So again, there was lots of talk in the 60s, depending upon where you were. Right? And there's often the assumption that because we're Black and brown, that we come from communities where we talked about race.
Right.
Our parents talked to us about it, and we learned all our history and all those things. And what feels important to me is that we recognize that just because we are, it doesn't mean we understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me chime in just real quickly. My experience was shaped, well, is perhaps best described if you know who my father was. My father came from a very, very poor family, 2-bedroom house in a place called Mounds, Illinois, which is at the very southern tip of Illinois. They were poor in the extreme. Wood stove, chickens raised in the house, 5 different siblings, 2 parents, and it was a tough, segregated world in Southern Illinois. Although Illinois was not as segregated as some Southern places, informal segregation was the rule of the day. There are places you couldn't go. The schools were segregated, all of that kind of stuff. But even though it sounds like boasting, my father's mother was a really smart woman. She was the first African American to go to college at a college in Illinois. And my father was able to get a scholarship. At that time, Illinois was giving a scholarship to any valedictorian in the state if they went to what was called a normal school. And normal schools were educators' schools, having nothing to do with normalcy. And so my father graduated from a black high school, and his graduating class had 8 people. He was the valedictorian, and he was able to seek his education. I bring all of that up only to say that I came from a family that were strivers, right? They found themselves in a position, especially after the Depression, which my grandmother lived through, that life was hard and they needed to find some way to get out. And the idea was, and this was true of a lot of Black families, they were going to use education as a way up, especially around the 60s, because that's when, after Brown versus the Board of Education in the late 50s came up, that we had what was called integration. We're going to integrate the schools, and Black folks are going to be allowed to go to college. Well, so what happened in that is, after my father and mother got married, and my father went into the military, he found himself in integrated places. So little Robin Parker went all over the world, wherever my father was stationed, and most of the people that he interacted with in a job and most of the people on the base were white, simply because that's the way the military was, very few Black folks. And because of that, and because of my father's and mother's experience, I had a very direct talk. I can remember it with my father saying, look, this is who you are, and you have lots of reasons to be proud of being a Black person. But get ready for it, son, because you're not always going to be treated well. And here's the reasons why. This is the way prejudice looks. And this is what I need you to do when those things happen. Don't ever doubt yourself. Keep your eye on the prize. But he said, you tell me things don't go well in school. You tell me if you have some problems with person X, Y, and Z. And so my racial experience was directly and explicitly informed by my parents in terms of what to expect. And as you can imagine, because I was in a environment where very often I was the only Black kid in the class, in the school, in wherever we were eating, all of that, those messages had to be sent very strong because my parents wanted me to be proud of who I am and also didn't want me to be confused. Right?
Mm.
Didn't want me to be confused about what my identity was. They wanted me to be proud of being African American when there were still lots and lots of things in the culture that said, oh, if you're Black, you're really a second-class citizen. And so their constant struggle was to reinforce how positive it was to be who we were in a world where you could still tune in and hear reruns of Step and Fetch It. You could look on TV and not see Black folks represented in positive ways. That I could walk down the street and hear the N-word shouted at me. And as you can imagine, all of those things can have a really um, damaging effect on a young child if they don't have strong support. And so for me, race was a common, ordinary experience, something that we had to talk about. I didn't know at the time, but I think that my parents did it because they wanted to make sure that I could survive in this really new environment, an environment that they were learning to navigate themselves. Both of them came from highly segregated environments.
Sure. Powerful.
Mm.
Very
Yeah,
powerful.
I mean, I almost feel like we could just stay right here and just keep building from there, right? Because there's so much that's coming up for me, questions that I want to ask you, Jamie, Sam, Robin. But let's dig it into the next question and see where it takes us, and we'll open another door. So the next question that we have is, When was one of the earliest moments you realized your race or culture shaped how others saw you? What were some of those earliest moments where you realized, oh, I have a race?
Mhm. Well, I'll go ahead and start there. So, like I said, there was kind of a, you're black, like you know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I knew that. I knew I went to black church, and um, uh, like I'd never gone to a white church, if you would, or anybody else. So I knew. So you knew it, but you didn't like know that it meant anything. Like, or you kind of like knew that it meant something, but not what it meant or how it really was impacting. So when it was really clear that I had race and it mattered was again that summer trip down to South Carolina, right? And I was a young child who was curious and loved just kind of exploring stuff. And across the street from my down a little bit down the road from the wasn't no street, it was a road down the road from my grandparents' house. um there was the white church, right? And the door, that was when the church of the doors was always open, and it's church, so everybody's welcome in the church. So I took my happy little black behind right on in the church. Right. And all of the pianos that I had seen were old. They were run down. They were often secondhand. This church had a beautiful new piano. And so I went in because I had just begun to learn to play piano and started playing on the piano.
Wow.
There were some folks who were in there. They did not say anything. And so, but then I just stopped and I left, right? And I went on back down the road. My grandmother, who was a domestic, took care of white people's children and cleaned their houses on the beach, got an immediate call that I had gone into the church. And she left work. And I remember the urgency with which she came home. And I got told very clearly that I was never to enter. And so that was one of my earliest memories of me getting clear messages that race mattered. And her urgency, she did not make me wrong. It was clear that she was afraid. She did clear that because again, we were there, me and my two sisters, we were there. They were taking care of us for the summer. And I had, and this all came up for me with Emmett Till, Emmett Till story.
Yeah.
And, it was re-stimulating because I was sent away to be with the family, and her fear of what could have happened to me because I did something or went someplace I wasn't supposed to and didn't know I wasn't.
And remind me, Jamie, how old were you?
8.
Wow.
No more than 8 or 9. Yeah, 8 or 9 years old. Maybe 10 at the most. So this would have been at the latest 1970. Right. So 70, 69, 70 would have been when that was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So and even at that, but for me, I still had not connected systems at all. I didn't know anything about it. For me, that was individual people who were racist, and those were Southerners. That was Southern people. And we didn't have, like, get me out of here, get me back to the North. We don't have those problems. It's what was the meaning I made in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that you were thinking getting back to the North, and I grew up in the North. You know, I'm a Baltimorean, right? And all of the things that happened there. I think the incident that shaped um, my awareness of others seeing my racial identity and how they saw me was around the same age, because I remember I was a fifth grader, went to a predominantly white elementary school, and I was one of two students in my class that was of color, right? I had a brother who was 2 years younger than me and was going to the school at the same time. And this was around MLK birthday celebration holiday, right? And while schools were not really focusing on that, um, we had enough in us to name it and to hold it. And my younger brother was in the bathroom and he asked four white young boys, "Do you know what today is?"
Mm.
Oh, okay.
And they said, "Why?" And he told them it was Martin Luther King's birthday. Um, and those four boys tried to flush his head down the toilet.
Oof.
And two of the students came out and got me and said, "Sam, you need to come into the bathroom because they are trying to beat up your brother." Now, I was both scared, afraid,
Mm.
didn't know what to do, but because it was my brother, I had to go into the bathroom, right? And I went into the bathroom and jumped several of them. And by then the teacher came in and broke it up. But outside of that, the teacher, being a white person, didn't say anything, didn't call my parents. And we normally, if we got in trouble, they would call our parents, but they didn't call our parents. And it just gave us this feel of being less than, right? Because of the way it was all handled. And that was one of the earliest and most vivid moments in my life as a young person that said, "Yep, you're Black. You're not seen as the rest of your classmates who are predominantly white," and how that shows up. Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm.
I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember an incident when, the very first incident, when I lived in Niagara Falls, New York. My father was stationed there. He was an officer working with cadets in ROTC. And I was sent to Catholic schools, not because we were Catholic, but my mother wanted to get me out of the house, and the Catholic school would allow me to enter school earlier than the public school was. My birthday was in December, and I think the cutoff was October for the public school. So we lived in base housing, and a bus would pick me up. And I was there for kindergarten, and first grade. And I don't remember which grade it was, but I remember one day, as usual, the bus would pick me up and I would just sit, wherever there was a seat. And one particular day, the seat that was available was next to a little white girl who I'd never met before. And so I just sat down and we proceeded to have a conversation. Keep in mind that this is a either first grader or kindergartner. Right? And we just sat down. I said, "Hi, how are you?" There was nothing dramatic. It was just, "Hello, who are you? What's your name?" Well, this bus driver did
Mm.
not like the fact that, one, I was sitting next to this little white girl, and two, that we were having a conversation. And you all might remember how buses work. That is, that the bus driver can obviously look through the window, but there's a mirror up there where he or she can see. And I remember that he began to yell at me, looking up in that mirror, saying, "You, you're not supposed to talk with her." right? Just over and over and over again. And I remember, you've got the usual dichotomy, right? I could tell that I was being mistreated on the one hand, but I also knew he was an authority figure that I was supposed to obey, right? And so I just retreated, right? I just retreated. And I did what little kids usually do, think that I had done something wrong. And so I didn't mention it to my parents at all.
Mm.
Over time, of course, um, I was able to reconcile all of that. But that was the very first time that I recognized that, oh, there's something nasty that happens around race. And this is one of the ways that the people who I'm supposed to be able to trust, right? The man that's driving the bus, may fail me. And so that was one of many small incidents like that, that it's still crystallized in my mind. And so crystallized that even to this very day, some 60 years later, I can remember the scene. I can even remember the tone of the man's voice, the bus driver. What about you, Jorge?
Oh man, I'm thinking about, like, in my case, right? The experience was so different than the three of you, because without going into a whole lecture about race in Latin America, right? It's different. And one of the ways in which it was different, particularly for someone like me, is that even though I have brown skin and in the summer, right, I look a little bit darker, um, I'm surrounded by people that are white, or at least ambiguous. You're not really sure. My mother looked white, my uncle, my cousins, some of my friends, right? Where we live. So all of that kind of puts me in this white category without naming it. Because again, we don't name these things, but there's an implicit understanding. As a matter of fact, I do have a document from the government of Peru where I was classified as white. So, you know, I didn't experience. Yeah, Jamie. I mean, I'll show it to you someday. I mean, I'm gonna keep it forever, because it's like I know they didn't ask me or my parents. Some government official looked at me and said, "Oh, okay, yeah, he's white." Um, so now it's officially on a legal document. um, so I didn't think about race. Nothing would happen to me to tell me I'm of a different race. But one of the things I do remember is, because kind of, we have four racial categories in a general way. We have white, we have mestizo, which is mixed, which includes me and a whole bunch of folks. And most people that don't want to claim a specific race will, well, I'm mestizo. What? Like, what mix are you, right? Like, I don't want to go that far. I'm just telling you I'm mestizo. Leave it alone. Um, it's sort of a shield to have to talk about anything beyond that. And then there's indigenous people, and then there's black people. Right? There's also some Asians, right? But for the most part, those are like the main categories. If you were to put me somewhere, again, I'm between mestizo and white anyway. I'm there. Uh, but the way I'm treated because of the people that I'm surrounded with, I am treated mostly as a white person. But very clearly, the treatment of black people, of indigenous people, was apparent. As a matter of fact, we had maids at home who were of indigenous descent, and there's a huge difference in terms of status, in terms of, you know. So I learned that even though I may be able to understand that at some level I have some indigenous ancestry, I distance myself from it. That's the way to navigate the racial arrangement in Peru. If you can pass, then you distance yourself from any of those roots that you may have. So I did not really come into, again, racial awareness until I'm in that room, Robin, that I was just talking about before, in that training, where all of a sudden it just hits me hard, and all these memories from growing up come up again, and like, oh, that's what that meant, right? And how I was being shaped into navigating this sort of unnamed racial landscape, but with some very clear parameters. Yeah.
Yeah. Very powerful around how race is mattering, even though we don't know it's mattering, right? Or how it's showing up, and um, the messages that we get, that you got to distance yourself, even within our racialized categories. It's okay to be this kind of black, but not this kind of black, right? And so more separation. There were the good ones, there were the not the good ones, there were the house and the field, and
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
and as you talked about the mestizo. So we're not going to talk about the mix because we don't want you to know about those parts. Just know that because I'm a mestizo, that there's some white in me, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's where I want you to see me as, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm closer to that, right? So it's fascinating, as we listen to each other, as I re-examine my own, how race matters, particularly as we talk about it in this context where there's this. I mean, all of us have a story, all of us,
Mm-hmm.
and as part of, as we sit down and do our work, that we could sit down and walk folks through. So just talk about, how what happened, what just that we might not have coded as race then. We didn't know it had a racialized lens. That's what was informing our behaviors, our parents' behaviors, the people's behaviors. It was this construction of race.
Yeah. And you learn again the boundaries, right? You learn the boundaries without people being so explicit, and you learn very implicitly, in my case, like what you can say and what you can't say.
Yeah.
My mother, I told Robin this story. Growing up, I have an older sister that's 2 years older than me and a younger sister that's 6 years younger than me. So as we were growing up, obviously, partly because of age difference, my older sister and my younger sister are playing, but at some point that play turns into a fight. They argue, and they will get loud. And my mom would say things, and these are the kinds of memories that pop up at the age of 35 when I'm trying to do this work. I was like, oh my goodness, it was all there. Like it was. My mom would say to my sisters, "You scream like black women." Right? I mean, and and that landed in such a way that I still can remember it at the age of 35. You scream like black women. What does that mean, Mom? What does that mean? Right? But the message, was very clear. You are not one of them. And they behave in ways that you don't want to behave. I mean, come on, like it was just loaded, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Such
to
a-
Jamie's point earlier, as I listened to this conversation, that class plays a part in this so much, right?
Yeah.
And so my father didn't graduate from high school, only had a third grade education. His parents was farmers. My mom did not graduate from high school as well. And so the ways in which we heard messages were very different than others, right? Because they didn't know how to really talk about this stuff, right? And how to set us down as a family and really have these difficult conversations, right? That we've learned over time to master or to engage in some way because of the classes that we are in now. And I wonder what it would have been like had my parents been able to finish high school, because their parents pulled them out of school saying, we need you in the field. We need you out there doing this work. You need to be out there picking cotton. You need to be out there helping your parents so that we can all survive, right? And so They didn't have the opportunity to finish an education that might have them show up differently, right?
Mhm.
And I imagine that while they probably didn't say it out loud, there was some regret for that, right? And I get to sit in the seat. There's sometimes I sit in the seat where I go, I wish I had the opportunity to. And what I also know is that my parents gave me the best they had, right? Because my dad was working 2 jobs to feed 11 people, right? And what that meant, right? And the modeling that showed me, that had me to show up the way I show up today with my children, right? But I also, as I listen to some of you and some of the things that we're talking about, I also get clear about how class shows up in this, and also marks some of our early understanding of race, or not having an understanding of race, and the dynamics of race and how that plays out in it as well. Yeah.
Well, as you named there, Sam, for me, this whole notion of most of us, because of our access to education and higher education, um, and as you named, Robin, that education was positioned as the great equalizer, right? Let's keep them ignorant. Let's keep them, but if the you learn stuff, you can read, you get to be in a different place. And so it's positioned many of us as in different spaces, maybe than where our families are. But I'm so clear that even as I talk with my sisters and their close friends and folks who are in my age category, they're talking about race in a very every day. So they're not using the terms and the language and things that we might use in some of our higher ed or professional corporate spaces, or as diversity educator spaces. But my sister talks about race at Temple University Hospital, where she done work for 30 years, and what happens when the new manager comes over, and what happens and who gets what roles and what positions. They talk about how that race matters. Working in the hospitals and the nurses and the people who get treated, and what the health disparities are. As I talk about people who are going into, from my church, who are going into doctors' offices and concerned about how they get seen and are treated, the class and race intersection is there. And so I often will say, particularly when we're doing some of this work and workshops and so on, that I don't as much get caught up in, some of the jargon and the language of the profession, when there are people who are just living it. They're simply living it, and don't have words like implicit bias and microaggressions and internalized oppression. They are living it.
That's right. That's right.
And can talk some to their actual lived experiences, and may not have known how to code that as race, and still having the messages that say that they don't want to, because that's playing the race card.
Right. Right.
Right?
Exactly.
When in fact, you're not playing no cards. That was race, right? What kind of thing that's very real.
Jamie, you remind me, and Robbie, you probably don't remember this. It's been a long time, and we've been through thousands of workshops, but for some reason, this one conversation in a workshop kind of early at the time, that when I was working with you in the Office of Bias Crime, we were facilitating this workshop, and there was a black man, I don't know, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, and he said, I've never experienced discrimination, racial discrimination. I've never experienced it. And then he goes on to talk about all the ways in which he wasn't promoted. He didn't receive this. To your point, Jamie, right? It's like he didn't have the language, and he didn't see it that way, but that's what he was experiencing, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I remember my when I was young, probably preteen, my grandmother worked as a domestic in Bloomington, Illinois. And for some reason, at the end of her shift, my mother and I went to go see her. And she worked for a very rich white lady, or at least someone who seemed very rich at the time. Her name was Mrs. Reich, I believe. And so I went to see my grandmother, and my grandmother and my mother were talking about a little sign that was put in the bathroom that could be used for the domestic. And in it, it simply said, do not put tissues down the toilet. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I noticed that my mother and grandmother were making a very, very, very big deal about it. And I later came to realize, of course, about, all of the coded messages about the use of facilities and, whether Black people were clean and whether they should use the same restroom facilities as white people, right? And so all of that comes together, right? Some of it is implied, some of it you pick up indirectly, but they're all racial experiences, even though race may not be mentioned expressly. There was no, Black people don't do this, but it was obviously aimed at the Black woman who was the domestic, and it was obviously framed in the sort of, oh, with those people and the restroom, we want to be real careful about their use. And so it's one of the what I call icky lessons about race that I learned early on.
Mm, mm. You know, uh, it reminded me, Robin, and you're going to find this extremely ridiculous, right? There are beaches in Peru that are in sort of upscale neighborhoods where the people that have homes there bring their domestic servants with them when they go to the beach over a weekend or maybe even, a few weeks in the summer. And their domestic servants have to wear a uniform. They can't, and they have to go on the beach as they're watching the children with their uniform on the beach in the summer. And one more thing, they can't go in the ocean. They can't go in the ocean. I mean, I'm not talking about back in the 50s. I'm talking about like last week.
Right.
Right.
Right. But we don't have no race.
No, no. It's not about race, Jamie.
That sounds a little bit like South Beach too, because South Beach, Florida, there are some places where a very rich oriented folks there, and they come out with their domestic folks who are there, and they're in uniform, right? They're in uniform, and they can't go in the water either. They can't get too close because you're going to lose focus if you're out there enjoying the water, right? And so it does sound very familiar. And
Wow.
as you just named, this is not something that was 30, 40, 50 years ago. This is stuff that's just recent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we're still having to engage those dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Robin, as we're now beginning to wind down a bit, I'm wondering if you have a question or two that you want to ask our friends.
Well, yes, I just happened to have a couple. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, this is when I originally posed the question, I thought, well, this would be somewhat lighter, but as I think about it, it's also it could be more tragic, and that is, what is something people often get wrong? Something people often get wrong about some aspect of your cultural identity. I I will answer that by saying it's I get a mixture of race and gender. In all of my life,
Mm,
people have been astonished that there could be a Black male named Robin, as though the only people named Robin in the United States would be Batman's sidekick and perhaps Robin Hood if he traveled to the United States. And so people incessantly would say, "Oh, when I saw your name, I thought it would be a woman." And they also say, "And I didn't think that you would be Black either," which is really interesting to me because it's this really odd collision between what we expect people to appear as because of their name around race and gender identity. And people would even challenge me. It's like, how do you spell it? I'd say, you spell it with an I, just like the bird. Are you sure it's not a Y? It's like, no, it's simply spelled with an I. And, the ladder of assumptions that people make around names and who to attach that to has constantly been a source of intrigue for me. As recent as last month, I had someone make a comment about my name and said, "Oh, I want to tell you a little joke about Batman and Robin." And I said, "Please don't. Please don't. It's right. I'm 66 years old. I've heard it all before. I don't really need that one." And so, if anybody wants to go there with me, I'm ready with all my passive aggressiveness.
Well, Robin, that wonderfully leads me to um, my response is that the assumption that our clarity means we're aggressive and angry.
Mm,
Right?
mm, mm.
And so if we say something with passion and clarity, and we're expressing our truth, that it therefore means that we're a threat.
Mhm.
So then we're always having to be measured,
Mm.
very measured, and at one level monotoned, or not expressing with the full passion what we might feel in any given moment about any given thing, particularly in workplace situations, or just in checking into a hotel, or getting on an airplane, or being at a grocery store. It's like, uh, I appreciate this chicken, but the grease was burnt, right? So um, navigating some of that. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm in the same space that you are in, Robin, is around my name, is because my name is Samuel Offer, and my name, often people didn't think it belonged to a Black person, um, because it didn't have all of the Blackness to it. Um,
Mhm.
and I remember doing a job interview and then doing it by phone, and then having to go in to meet the person that I talked to on the phone, and walked in and said, "My name is Sam Offer, and I'm here to meet such and such." And they called back and said, "Your interviewee is here, and Sam Offer is here." And the person came out, and before they could say hello to me, they said, "Oh, he's Black."
Wow.
Right? And so all of what they were holding around my name, Sam Offer, and then of course being able to articulate what I needed to say in that conversation, had them hold me not as a Black man. And that happens so much. It happens so much, and it is irritating because it says, this is what you think of me, my race, and how we should show up, and you've just bucket us all together, put us all in the same bucket, that this is what you're supposed to get, right? And so, yeah, just my name, Sam Offer, because my name is German. Last name Offer is German.
Mm.
And
Mm.
asked me how I got it. I think it was, we were owned, at some point and attached that name to us. And then the name Samuel, which for lots of people is given to white boys.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Mm. Mm.
What about you, Jorge?
I was just thinking how again this is a place of sort of distinction, because one of the things that I've experienced over time here in the United States is this is coming from white people, right? That I am going to be culturally different than black people
Ah,
in a way to make me more palatable, right? And it's usually, in the most sort of stereotypical way. I'm the happy, bow your head and just do your work, Latino man, right? You don't make trouble. You're just nice. You just go along. So because you do that, you're not going to be like them, And I'm watching, make sure that you don't behave like that. And I'll give you a quick example of how that played out. At one point, I was working as a nursing assistant in a psychiatric hospital. I actually worked there for 8 years. Um, that could be a whole other episode right there. What it means to work in a psychiatric hospital. But I was the only Latino, at least in my unit. And there may have been one or two, but there weren't a whole lot of Latinos, and there were a good number of black people that worked there, and actually a good number of Haitians that worked there. And I was always praised for how respectful I was, how responsible I was, how good of an employee I was. I was held up often as a model employee until I realized one point that the nurses had a union, but nursing assistants, cafeteria workers, housekeepers didn't have a union, and we could have benefited from having a union. So I became a lead organizer for the union. And the moment I claimed that, all those other messages about me were gone. I was not anymore the model employee. I betrayed their sense of trusting me that I was going to be this nice, respectful individual. And then on top of that, I'm actually organizing with the black folks in the in the hospital, right? Very close. Haitians were like, "Yeah, let's go," right? I'm like, yeah. So I busted through all those expectations and all those accolades that I received, because up to that point I had just been nice and respectful.
Mm.
mhm.
Jorge, I thought you were going to mention the way folks mess up your name.
Oh, well, hey, you want to go there? That's a whole. That's
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, right before we got on this, I get a call from the doctor's office that I have an appointment on Thursday. Can I speak with George, please? And sometimes I feel tempted to say, like, oh, he doesn't live here. I just said, oh, yeah, this is Jorge. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's Jorge. It happens all the time, Robin, as you know.
Yeah.
Mhm. And there are, I would guess, millions of people on the planet named Jorge.
I mean, right? At this point, you can say Jose, because I know Jose is the most sort of common Latino name in the U.S., right? It's not that far from Jose. And also, when you when
Look
you
at the spelling.
I know, right? When you look at it, there's no E after the J. So you really have to do some mental gymnastics to get from Jorge that you see on the page to George. Right? But they do it all the time, Robert. It doesn't fail. It doesn't fail. And I won't tell you some of the stories of other ways in which people have pronounced my name. That it's not it's not for a PG audience.
Okay. Okay. I hear you. I hear you. So we've been talking primarily about race and ethnicity. Um, I would be interested to know what are some of the highlights and lowlights in your life of that identity? Of course, I don't necessarily want to know all of them, or that, you necessarily prioritize one or the other. But if you had to speak in a general way, what would you say would be the highlights and the perhaps challenges might be a better word of being a man of color?
Yeah.
So I think a highlight for me, and I'll enter with a highlight. I want to think about the challenge piece. Um, but I think a highlight for me is what we're doing today, like these types of conversations that we get to have with men of color, right? They feed my spirit. I can't tell you all how I am leaving this conversation with such a renewed energy, right, around it, because we get to share in spaces like this. We get to see, as we started out, you're not the only one, Sam Offer. It's not just you, Sam Offer, right? And that we have such a incredible relationship that strengthens one another, right? And so I'm walking away with things that I've learned about you, Robin, and about you, Oriet, um, that I can take away. I know a lot of stuff about Jamie already, just so that you all know that. But this conversation is really a highlight for me. And I think when I'm in room with men of color and we're having these kinds of conversations are really highlights for me. It really speaks to my soul and my heart. Yeah.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, I think that the first things that come to mind was going to be exactly what Sam said. I'm watching the seventh season of the Chai,
no.
uh, and what I love that they have in there is a sister circle and a brother circle, and in there is space where and they look different, but the intention is the same, and is to break down the isolation um, of navigating these racialized and gendered experiences alone, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so not coming together in spaces um, to pretend like being who we are don't matter, not talking about all the other things in the world, but navigating what it means to be, kind of Black men. And it's cross generational, right? And so when I think about the highlights, it is when I have opportunities, whether it's one on one cross generational relations with other young Black and brown men, whether it is, one of my favorite spaces is was the summits that African American male summit, the things that we used to do at White Privilege around men of color spaces. But when we would get, because what I found was, and again, I hadn't done this really, until I was involved in this work, was there wasn't space to do gendered work,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
And where we got to be men and talk about the stuff, right? Um, uh, and it's not always easy, right? So, because we're not socialized into being in conversations about what our thinking are, what our fears are, what our feelings are, and so on and so forth, because that's a counter narrative to being Black and brown men. We have to just kind of keep all that secret, and we just gonna talk about how we're strong and surviving and putting up with the stuff, but to really deal with what it means. So being in spaces with Black and brown men who um, uh, can be themselves, their full authentic selves, has been very powerful for me. And when I say Black and brown, I mean minoritized men or men of color as a whole, in that whole thing. So that's some of the beauty. The challenges for me where we don't have those kind of spaces, and where I see the impact of that, right? Where when I run into minoritized men who cannot show up whole, but they show up in performance,
Mm.
and performing Black masculinity, performing brown masculinity, when it is clearly a performance, right? It's like, and it's worse when they don't know it is.
Mm.
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 That if there's a level of consciousness around, I have made the choice to perform this way because this matters to me, and in order for me to get what I want in this space, this is what I need to do. I might not agree with that choice, but I can deal with that in a whole different way, right?
Mhm.
But when we're showing up in this performing, and often it's performing whiteness, performing whiteness and masculinity that they're not aware that they're doing, it feels dangerous, and then very sad. Yeah. So.
Mhm.
Mm.
So last question, Jorge, unless you want to share a highlight or low light or both.
Well, I had some ideas of a couple of things, but Jamie, that last point you just made, and I'm thinking about how us Latino men navigate the racial landscape in the United States. And one of the things that I see too often, and not only do I see, but I did myself for 8 years. I actually changed my name, from Jorge Zeballos to George Zeballos. It is exactly to do what you just mentioned, Jamie, because I realized that in doing that, I was actually getting less rejection, more welcoming, right? So making my name and my presence more palatable to white United States. Right? So yeah, and again, there's so many of us, Pedro, Peter, Jose, Joe. I was like, dude, like, I have a friend from high school that lives in Canada. His name is Jose. Again, not that hard, right? I mean, that if there's one Latino name that you all can say, it's Jose. At least one, right? I know you can say that, and yet he goes now by Joe, right? So yeah, that's a definitely part of my own experience, and I'm not necessarily proud of having done that. I understand why I did it, and then it got to the point where I needed to reclaim it because I just felt like I was losing myself.
What's powerful for me is that I've heard that from lots of Latino Latin brothers.
Yeah, yeah,
That very thing.
exactly,
I
exactly.
know that lots of my Asian siblings as well have done the same thing with their names.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I celebrate
So
that you were able to reclaim that, right? Which is often a big
Yeah.
effort, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
just know that I'm holding that dear, right? The reclaiming is powerful.
Appreciate that. No, like I said, I mean, it got to the point where I'm saying my name, George Zeballos, and I don't recognize myself in it.
Who am I talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, oh,
Did you go home and forget? And somebody, who you talking? What you talking?
right, right. No. And
That is
now
that is
I
not
say
your
it,
man.
right. Now I say it with a thicker accent, right?
Right.
Jorge Ceballos. What? I say, hey, you figure it out. It's Jorge Ceballos.
I actually witnessed Jorge at giving a keynote speech where at the end of it, well, you tell it, Jorge, at the end of it,
what happened?
that you had said something in Spanish.
Oh, right,
And
right.
And what happened? The woman said, "Oh, could you please translate what that means?" And your response was,
Look it up. Yeah, but here's a funny thing, right? So it was this very, I mean, it was the first time I'm doing a keynote in a large sort of conference like that. And I felt like it made it very personal, told my personal story, and making obviously a larger point about indigenous presence in this continent. Uh, so I close and I'm feeling like, and I get a standing ovation, right? It's like I feel like super high, and I'm like, and the very first question, this woman gets up after all of that, and the only thing she can think of is, can you translate what you just said? In the closing, I shared a little phrase. Can you translate what you said into English? And for a moment, Sam, I almost went there. I'm like, oh, yeah. I was like, oh, no, look it up. I'm not your freaking dictionary. Look it up. Oh,
There's
my God.
this thing on Amazon, you can buy that translates.
I mean,
I don't know. Figure it out.
all of what I shared about this, like the racial dynamics in the Latino community and what it means personally, and the first thing you can think of is, can you just translate that for me? Really? Like you didn't hear
I
anything?
don't want to do the work. I don't want to do the work. You do it for me.
Right. And I just told you 5 times to get off my land.
right. Pick up the dictionary on your way out, right? So this is really the last question. You all know cartoon bubbles where the characters don't say anything, but there's a little smoky bubble up there where you get to know what the character is thinking, even though the character doesn't say anything. And so I know you all are master trainers, and this has happened to you, I would guess, frequently. So what would be your reaction when someone says to you, I don't see color? Or the other thing is like, I don't think of you as a Latino or a Black man. What's in your cartoon unspoken bubble?
So I'm gonna start because it happened last week.
There you go.
And what happened? The person's looking at me, or she's talking to the room, and she's saying, I just come to work and I just see people, and I don't see color. And so the bubble over my head was because I was looking out and I was looking at the women of color in the space, and I said, they're gonna kill you. That was in my head. That was in my head. I was like, they're gonna kill you.
You better run.
You better run, girl. Right. So that was the bubble in my head because they caught my eye. Caught my eye, and I just kind of holding the space, right? And then kind of again facilitated that response and so on and so forth. But that was the bubble. They're gonna kill you.
I think in me when I hear that and I hear people say it, and up here in my little thing is just bombs going on. I just want to blow you up. Because you would think by now that people have learned better, and they still haven't, right? And the number of people that say that over and over again, I don't see color, I just see you as a person. And I'm like, boom. Blow them up. Blow 'em up. Yeah.
The worst part of that is kind of maybe what happened to you, Jamie, which is you might have spent a couple of days with this group laying out all kinds of information that should make it clear to folks. And it's kind of like this woman at the end of this very passionate personal speech says, "Can you translate that for me?" like you didn't hear a freaking word I said for the last 2 days, right? And you come up and you're still gonna like assert your sort of privilege to say color doesn't mean anything, right? So I was watching a documentary on Obama earlier, and they play this moment in the in one of his State of the Union addresses, where one of the congressmen said, "You lie," remember, right? So that would be for me, Robin. It's like, I don't see color. You lie. I know you do. What are you talking?
I like you do.
You lie. You lie.
You lie.
I like that.
And for me, it would be very easy. It would be some variation of, Lord, please help me not kill this person.
Well, you know what?
Please.
Yes. What I love, I have long wanted a session where those of us who do the work could do the bubble.
Mhm. Mhm.
What are the comments that have been made, and what were the things you wanted to say? Right. Just as
Mhm.
again, as a self-care, as a resilience, as a space of joy and laughter, to see the things that actually are going on in our heads when that happens. What I did want to say was the other thing that has me be able to do the work is I remember when my response to that was thank you.
Oh, yeah. I hear you.
Mhm.
When my own level of racial consciousness
Mm-hmm.
would have
Mhm.
had me say
Mm-hmm.
thank you. And I remember when I did say thank you, because I thought that that was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is the truth of the journey and where I am today and how I show up in the world as a transformation to liberation.
Mm-hmm.
But as we talk about the Chronicles, right, that there was a time when my response. So part of it is I see myself in them.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
got the same message. If you look at some of my work that I do, is I talk about needing to upgrade our technology, and that's our mindset, and that was a part of the mindset. And the not seeing color was progress.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone to say that, that was a good thing, right? It meant that I, under that unintentionally, was meant I did not see you as less than or see people as that, right? So that's been a part of the journey. But I love the question is where we are today.
Well, I think that we could have many more episodes, and maybe just the thought bubble episode would be enough. Although we'd have to make it not for children, but yes, indeed.
Exactly.
Jorge, take us home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look. Clearly, we have spent close to an hour and a half, and I feel like we could stay here for another 2 hours still. And I just want to say to both of you, I love you, my brothers. Yeah, I do. Um, and anytime I get to spend time with you, Sam, you were saying that you were leaving with your spirits high. Same here. I mean, you both have been important colleagues, friends in this work for many years, and I just cherish our relationship. So thank you for spending time with us. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Been enough.
Ditto for me. So glad that you are friends of ours and part of really our experience. It's been wonderful, especially during this episode.
Thank you.
So we'd like to thank our guests, Jamie Washington and Sam Offer. We'd like to have you put your comments in the comments section. Definitely give this a thumbs up and subscribe. And we'd like to invite both Sam and Jamie back again sometime real soon. Thank you all so much.
Take care, everyone.
Take
Take care.